Yeah, hi. Thank you, everyone. Arpan will just join in a couple of minutes. So, first of all, thank you, all the panelists, on behalf of IVCA and the industry startup investor ecosystem at large. And it's a real pleasure to have all of you. And we've also got around 50 odd people on board now, listening to all of us, seeing all of us as we speak. So as we can obviously understand the sensitivity of the situation. So first of all, I'd like to just do a quick round of intro before I pass the baton to Ashish, who will be moderating today's session. So first of all, thank you so much, Anil sir. I think you've been on really on the war front, on the front line, taking care of all of these startup related issues and helping and ensuring all of these things are streamlined for the citizens of the country. So I think real big thanks to DPIIT, Startup India, Invest India, and this is a time really to appreciate all of the, not just the government but also the police force that is online. We all are seeing everything, and who are just tirelessly doing working 24/7, all the doctors and everyone. So thank you everyone, and thank you Anil sir for sparing time for this. Also, I would like to just give a quick round of introduction. Anil sir is from DPIT. Obviously, everybody knows him, but I'd just like to tell that he's been championing all of the startup related issues, all of the, in the past also historically, issues like angel tax and other issues like ESOPs. He's the one who's been championing all of this, for us along with the DPIT Commerce Ministry, the Global Venture Capital Summit that was hosted a couple of times. It was all through Anil sir, and all of the other things that go unnoticed otherwise. He's the man behind all of it. So real big thank you Anil sir for joining in. And a quick round of introduction for the others. Nitin is from he's one of the founding members of Kotak PE, and he's Kotak P. Otherwise, he's got so many relevant investments which we will witness and hear through the session, and understand how these companies that Nitin's been involved with have been helping the ecosystem. And then we've got Rahul from Quadre Capital. Again, they've got a P fund which is Quadre Capital, and also Health Cord, which is more early stage. So they're a complete healthcare focused fund, and I'm sure Rahul can bring in an overall perspective in terms of startup and growth stage companies as well, just like Nitin. Then you've got Amit again, who's typically on the waterfront as a startup, who's very relevant in the current situation and has been championing all these causes. And then obviously Ashish, who's not just a champion early stage investor from Bloom, but also very active with IVCA in terms of all of the regulatory parliamentary meetings, roundtables that we do. Ashish has been with us for a long time now, and so he understands from startups to investments, whether it be VC or even the government and regulatory angle. So over to you, Ashish, from there for taking it up further.
Hi everyone, and a very good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining. Uh, so the thought process would be to have opening remarks. What we would do is, everybody knows, I think, that we are in the midst of a really unprecedented challenge, and enough and more has been said about the problems on hand. And the best part is that we have had a very active and a proactive government machinery which has been on the job continuously. And who better than Mr. Agrawal himself to join us and our other illustrious panelists. So what I propose to do is, without taking away too much of time on the context, I would straight away would like to just give a bit of info for the people who are joining as participants. Is that please keep your questions ready towards the end of it. And the idea is to deliberate the problems and solutions with some specific articulated expectations as well. So as a part of this discussion, we also would love to hear from people. Of course, the panelists are going to talk about a few things, but also from the other participants on what specifics they would like from the government machinery. So that is going to be something that you should all be ready with. So let me quickly turn over to you, Anilji. Welcome, Arpan. Thanks for joining. A quick introduction for Arpan as he joins us. He's a partner at Bain and has been a champion in the tech investment ecosystem as well. And he has been championing India and the tech ecosystem at large. Thanks for joining, Arpan.
Hey Ashish, thank you.
So let me quickly go over to Anilji. Sir, you saw the crisis unfold over the last 4 to 6 weeks. Would just love, as a part of the opening remarks, on how what were the thinking and the thought process initially, and how the whole thing has shaped out from the government side, and the whole process of going and issuing proactive notifications, advisories, etc. And what is it that are the key learnings and observations for us on the investment side, early stage industry, founders, this community in general? So would love your take, sir, before we go over to specific questions on the panel.
Thank you, Ashish, and thank you, Amit, for having me here. We are probably in, as a country, as a nation, we are in an unprecedented situation. We've never thought that we are going to have a lockdown of the entire country. And I think this is one of the boldest decisions that this government has taken. And across the board, wherever we interact, this decision has given a sense of security to everyone. There are inconveniences associated with this decision, but everybody has got a sense of security with this decision, that yes, there is somebody capable of taking tough decisions, and the government is alive to the situation, and we are actually doing it. See, at this point of time, we've been part of the whole decision-making process. Over the last 3 or 4 weeks, things have moved very fast at the government of India level. There are certain announcements. First is, everybody knows an economic package that has been announced by the finance minister. If you look at the content of that package, it essentially is meant for the marginal sections of the society. Those people who need the support, who need the economic support, essentially that. Second, we are looking at some kind of relaxations, compliances. So if you have financial year ending on 31st of March, there are certain things which can be pushed for the moment, let's say about 3 months. So most of the compliances are being shifted to 30th June. In fact, in DPIT, what we've done is whole lot of licensing that is required in terms of explosives, in terms of boilers, in terms of all other acts. And that is what we are working at. All these licenses which you had for this financial year would be valid at least for another quarter without doing anything else on the part of the licensee. So these are the kind of things that we are doing. We had, at the same time, we need to see this entire management of the current situation requires everybody to come together. As a country, we have huge resources. We have huge intellectual resources, and we have huge energy. That, that demographic dividend that we have. So what we're trying to do is, for end-to-end management of this situation, we are doing a kind of capacity mapping. Like for example, if you need personal protective equipment, are we importing it, or are there capabilities within the country where we could synergize certain companies and they can start doing it? You may have seen certain things already happening. For example, There are companies who started looking at production of masks who have never done it. Sugar factories and other things are being permitted to produce masks and sanitizers. There are companies looking at designs of ventilators. They are in its approval stage. So we have all come together. DPIT, GST, DBT, MIT, Niti Aayog. We've created one common platform for dealing with COVID-19 situation for the country. So what we've done is we are doing a capacity mapping, as I said, and we've launched a grand challenge. It is open till Sunday, and I would request all of you to come on that common platform. So what we are doing is we are trying to build a common source of all information which could be used by all government agencies for dealing with this kind of situation. And it is not just, it is not just about treating patients. It is not just about healthcare. It's about how do you create systems with contactless entry or exit? How do you do geofencing? How do you monitor movement of people? How do you maintain supply chains? Because you see, nobody is expecting that in 21 days, we are going to be up and running once again.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Nobody is expecting that. So we know that this is essentially to flatten the curve. All these efforts are essentially for flattening the curve, right? So we don't want the peak to be very high, and we don't want the peak to come so early that we are not able to manage it with
Sure.
resources. So all this is important steps towards delaying the peak and reducing the peak. So when we delay it during that time, we need to build our capacities. So we are able to look at the peak and we are able to manage the peak comfortably. This is what the entire effort of all government departments is geared towards this. Since this,
on that,
we have been managing the transitional issues. So naturally, when you announce that, like 4 hours from now, we are all getting into lockdown, there are transitional issues. So many people are in transit, and then they need to be, allowed to reach their destinations over a period of time. So most of the issues are sorted out in terms of, interstate movement of goods, trucks, that is being permitted. There are ground level implementation issues still remaining, but the intent of the government of India is very clear that this has to be done. And we are saying that it is not a curfew, it is lockdown, and there is essential difference between the two. So in lockdowns, we are permitting all essential services, and in terms of especially essential services, we have said very clearly, the government has said very clearly that we will permit complete end-to-end supply chain, right from manufacturing till end use, which includes supply of intermediaries also. So you need plastics, you need packaging, you need other things also when you produce these things. So this is the intent. So the intent of the government is very clear. I'm sure in the next 2 to 3 days, we will be past these transitional issues.
So on that note, sir, if I can, would also pull in Rahul and Nitin on the specific measures and activities that they have seen across the portfolio. And what is it that, how are the support systems moving? What is the level of disruption they have seen? And what are the measures that they have taken to share with people and thereby learning for the participants on how some of these steps can be done. And in terms of specifics, if at all, with examples, would love their take. So Rahul, if you could start. No, I think we'll have to unmute Rahul.
Ashish, am I audible now?
Yeah, now yes.
Okay, sorry. I think there was some issue with the headphone.
No worries.
So see, Quadrian Health Quad, we are healthcare focused growth capital and VC fund. On the growth capital side, we've invested in hospitals, in pharma companies, in diagnostic labs, and on the VC side, we've invested in some tech healthcare plays, some very interesting ones. Now, again, all of these companies are at the forefront of in this battle. Obviously, the at the front line are the hospitals and the diagnostic labs who are dealing with these situations on a daily basis. On the hospital side, there has been a decline somewhere around the lockdown. Obviously, elective surgeries, elective procedures have gone down, and of course, rightfully there's been an advisory from the government as well to the hospitals to keep ICU beds and ventilators free for the worst case. Not sort of occupy them for other elective surgeries which can wait, right? So those are some of the things which hospitals are waiting. Of course, they are taking their own measures because they are also worried about the safety of their staff who have to keep treating patients. And since sometimes diagnosis is not on the spot, you may have undetected cases which you may be dealing with, as we've seen in some of the cities like Bhilwara and all, where these have sort of multiplied into bigger problems. So they're of course worried about the health and safety of their doctors, of their nurses, of their staff who are dealing with patients inside a hospital, and you don't know who ends up being a positive case, right? So they're dealing with those issues. One of the labs which we have, Strand, they have been accredited to do COVID tests. So and pharma companies, of course, one of the pharma companies, they're a contract manufacturer. One of the products for them is hand sanitizers. So all of them are playing their own part. And thankfully, what we hear from them is that the policy support, whenever they reach out to healthcare departments or whoever they're dealing with, support is coming in very quickly and very empathetically and with empathy. So I think that is good. I think the entire ecosystem, entire value chain is playing its role and facilitating. Everyone understands the gravity of the situation. Now, the other things which the companies are doing are, of course, cutting costs, because we all understand, as Anil sir also mentioned, it's not that after 21 days this issue is going to go away. We're just trying to flatten the curve. We're just trying to manage the peak. But this problem most likely is going to stay for some time. And our best bet is to manage it in a way where we can minimize the disruption and losses, right? So what the companies are bracing for is a difficult cash flow situation where revenues remain subdued. So in March, most of the companies have seen a 15-20% dip. What we have from other sectors is that the dip is as high as 60, 70, 80%. But this being healthcare, the dip so far has only been 10 to 20% for different companies. But of course, in April and May, because of lockdown and restrictions, this will only exaggerate, right? So they are looking to conserve cash. Today's measures, which have been announced by the RBI, and hopefully some will come for the corporate sector as well. So those might help in managing cash flow situations and cash flow black swan events for companies, individually. But they are looking to cut costs. Look at this opportunity to cut costs wherever they can on, adopting Indian generics, Indian consumables, push those decisions with doctors and clinicians, and try and cut cost and conserve cash, so that they don't have to take the worst case steps of, firing staff or cutting salaries to try and minimize costs. And as Anil sir said, looking at various available indigenous options to try and manage the situation.
So on the specifics of the corporate package that you just referred out, I'm going to come back to you in the next round on what specifics you would like to see as a part of a corporate package if and when it comes. Let me go to Nitin. That was an interesting take from Rahul on how there is a relevant healthcare portfolio which has become part of the whole system to solve the issues. Would love if Nitin could deliberate on the measures at some of the other portfolio companies with a little more elaboration on the cost cutting and the other challenges that they have observed and are seeing over the next few days. No, Nitin, we can't hear you. Nitin, we'll have to unmute Nitin, please.
Okay, great. Sorry. Thanks, Ashish. So we again have a very large healthcare focused portfolio of investing across pharma, diagnostics, and of course health tech, and besides of course hospitals. So let me take all the three of these segments, right? I mean, pharma is of course the largest for us, and what we have seen is some of the larger pharma companies which are pretty well organized in terms of transportation. By buses, etc. Those companies have started working already. They are actually working pretty much 2 shifts today. Almost 90%, 80 to 90% attendance has been there. Their challenge has been with the temporary workers who don't have high cards, so they're finding it difficult to get the temporary workers into the factory, which is of course a very large percentage of their typical workforce. Most of these companies have staggered in terms of workers, 50% working on alternate days. So 50-50 kind of a staggering has happened in terms of both workers as well as the management side. The challenges that I hear from them are in terms of the supply of raw materials and packaging materials, as well as even paper, for that example. They need to print out for GMP stuff, etc., etc. So most of them have inventory levels for about 7 days, 7 to 10 days is what they can manage. And beyond that is what they're going to probably run into a challenge coping with this shortage. So their worry is in terms of, while I think the notification talks about pharma, of course, Anilji has clarified it is the entire value chain, but since the notification specifically talks about healthcare or pharma, obviously all the pharma, etc., the police and the other have been very supportive in terms of enabling the transportation of these workers, as well as allowing the companies to operate. But if you look at the packaging material suppliers, the manufacturers, the corrugated box manufacturers, the printers, for example, all these companies are today closed. And they're very unorganized. Obviously, even the manpower is not able to reach them. So I think the worry will be in terms of how these companies therefore manage to get themselves running in the next few days very quickly, so that we don't see shortages in the pharma companies, including APIs, because APIs also small companies, many of them. Don't see shortage, and otherwise we'll have a challenge in terms of seeing drugs in terms of regular supplies in the hospitals and the clinic networks. So that I think we need to really worry about. In terms of diagnostics, I think again because they're all on the ground, they're really working hard. In fact, those are the guys really out there trying to get approvals for COVID tests and as well as whatever at-home collection, etc., etc. But one of the biggest things again is shortage of materials. In fact, when I was talking to one of our CEOs of our diagnostic company, I think he mentioned about the coverall and face shields, the shortage of coveralls and face shields, goggles, personal protective equipment, for example, which Anilji also mentioned, viral therapeutic media, the swab sticks, as well as the diagnostic test kits. So again, without these, obviously the diagnostic companies are going to be handicapped. So again, the supply chain has to get activated in the next few days to really will fill some of these diagnostic companies with all the supplies and regularly, and be able to sort of deliver this service to the people. Coming to the biotech and the health tech segment, which is one of the recent segments, in fact, we have invested only in the last 2 years. We made about 7 investments. But on the overall, of course, as I was speaking to the Bangalore biotech side, all the companies out there, pretty much all the entire Karnataka biotech is closed down. All the small companies are all closed. The labs are, because they have all labs out there, and the lab work is pretty much closed. Pretty much all the employees are working from home, looking at some kind of data analytics and whatever, all the other stuff, back-end stuff that was pending for long. I think they're trying to cope up with that. They will, of course, they seek approvals, special approvals from the Karnataka government, as well as similarly, I heard from Andhra also, as well as from Pune also, that they are seeking for approvals for getting their employees into work slowly, because today they are actually being obstructed there.
Sure.
So that's a big challenge. But having said that, from our side, we have almost 7 companies that we have invested in the tech, medtech space, of which 5 are already working on COVID solutions. And quickly, they're sort of, it was good to see that using their facilities, using their know-how, using their technology to adapt to finding COVID solutions. And just to list out a few names, Minvax is a company that we have that is working on influenza vaccine, which is immediately started work on COVID vaccine. In fact, the Gates Foundation reached out to them, and they have been actively supported by them as well as a couple of other people. The work has already started on the COVID vaccine. It's a long journey though, but the good part is I think that entire effort, which was non-funded, is now slowly getting funded. Support from the government also, both from DBT, DST, etc. The second company is Supercraft 3D, which incidentally is into 3D printing of medical implants as well as medical device parts, which again has got manufactured a splitter for a ventilator. So you typically have a ventilator used for one person. So by actually 3D printing a splitter, the same ventilator can be used for 2 people, and now they're working for if it can be used for 3 people. So the work has already started. They're already talking to manufacturers. They're already talking to hospitals directly to replace their single whatever the splitter or their single whatever outlet there with a splitter, so that the same ventilator can be used with multiple people.
So if I can just also circulate the particular point to Arpan, and up to hear some of the other case studies on the other companies that you mentioned. But if I can just pull in Arpan at this point in terms of the overall economic impact in terms of productivity, etc., we all know it is at a standstill. But in terms of a brief guidance for the upcoming 2 quarters or 4 quarters, how do you see this thinking in terms of just moderating the growth or some kind of deceleration? How do you see this?
Sure. First, let me say thank you to IVCA and for everybody on the call. I hope everybody is in a safe place. The second thing I will say is I have no crystal ball, and I'm not an economist. I'll just give you my opinion, and I'll give you what we're seeing play out in China and what we're seeing play out in some other markets. I think first, if you go all the way back to the SARS impact a few years ago, there were a few learnings from that, and COVID is different, and I'll talk about the differences. SARS, the impact on macro activities was one-time and temporary. There was a relatively quick rebound across most sectors after SARS. Some sectors, particularly services sectors, travel, hospitality, some aspects of retail, took a long time to recover, and capital markets got hit pretty substantially. I think the differences, some of the differences are quite obvious this time between COVID and SARS. COVID is a global pandemic. We're a much more global economy than we were when SARS hit. The pandemic is playing out right now in all the major economies globally. The impact on macroeconomic is we're seeing it play out. Everyone saw the U.S. unemployment numbers from yesterday, where it spiked from 200,000 on a typical week to 3.5 million this past week. All indications it'll go to 3.5 to 4 million in the next week as well. So it is a swift and severe impact. Our view is that if you look at China, there are early signs of recovery as China begins to come out the other end. Their Q1 GDP declined by 2%. Their consumer confidence fell substantially. Our consumer confidence measures come out next week, I believe, so we'll probably see a similar dip. Manufacturing activity collapsed in China. But what we're seeing already in the first 2 weeks of these last 2 weeks of March is coal consumption is at a kind of all-year high. Work has resumed in all 11 regions of China. There's traffic in the cities again, and you can see that in the pollution levels have gone back up. I think we've all seen the charts on Twitter and et cetera of sort of pollution-free China. Well, that's becoming a thing of the past. The metros have 65% of the volumes they had pre-COVID, so we're beginning to see the traffic come back. I think the U.S. and and since I don't have a crystal ball, I'll talk about how we're thinking about it. There are potentially 3 scenarios that'll play out globally, depending on how things go, which is the base case scenario that we're focusing on, is that US infections and US impact begins to peak out and subside in Q2, so the April, May, June quarter of the year. They begin the return in the US to pre-crisis levels of activity towards the beginning of Q3, so July timeframe. EU continues to be overwhelmed through Q2. China gets back towards normal levels of activity, meaning 80% in the mid to late part of Q2. And if that happens, what we see, is sort of this a V-shaped contraction, right? Sharp contraction, sharp decline in GDP, and then on a path to full recovery, but that recovery takes sort of 6 to 12 months. If it's a slow burn, which is basically effectively governments don't react, and I think India, to India's credit, and to Mr. Agarwal, to your credit and your government's credit, I think while painful, I think this lockout will help us flatten the curve. I think in other countries it may not happen. And so we see kind of more of a V-shaped type recovery. But we also believe very strongly that there are industries and things that will not snap back to more normal. And I think this has implications for everybody. I think digital ways of working, I think the penetration curve acceleration, I think is going to be dramatic. Before this crisis, we would have said that groceries online, would have hit 3-4% penetration in 4 or 5 years. I think that assumption can be thrown to the wind. I think you'll see dramatic, there'll be other parts of the economy that are completely slammed. I think, some of the things that Nitin talked about from a healthcare perspective, remote healthcare, there will be substantial ways in which the consumption happens. Consumer behaviors will change. I think the way the governments of India and other governments approach health and health security and food security will be quite different than before. I do believe the world will be a little bit less global than it was before this crisis. Let me kind of pause. Let me pause there, I guess.
No, that's very helpful perspective, 360 degrees outside as well as India. Let me turn over to Amit. Amit, as 2 things Arpan mentioned, which I'm going to just pick out. Patterns of consumption, both at the government level and at the level of people, consumers, is likely to change, is what he mentioned. Some of the adaptations to tech will likely stay, and we will see a new way of consumption come up in larger audience than it has been ever before, whether it is e-commerce, consumption of services, regulatory frameworks being implemented. As a founder, would love your take on that. And maybe you could start a brief with how the community, the founder community in general, took the steps on work from home briefly on and how things are, and then elaborate with your views on what Arpan mentioned.
Sure. So am I audible? Okay. So first of all, thanks Ashish, Amit and IVCA for inviting me as well as the panel. I think from my perspective, if you really look at this whole situation, one of the fundamental things that we've been talking about, and I speak to a lot of my peers and founders, irrespective of whether they are termed unicorns or early stage, everyone's going through the same process of first fear, second, denial, and then third, appreciation of reality, and then starting to look at what does this mean in terms of the new world and the new reality this has created, which basically pans across everything that we do, right? It's not only a small portion of work from home, it's everything around our business model, it's everything around how we really conduct ourselves, how we live, what kind of services today or in future would potentially become more relevant. So I've had a lot of discussion with fellows where they're starting to look at pivoting their businesses from totally different industries to look at how they can realign themselves to the point that Rahul and Nitin also made, where, if I've got 60 or 80% erosion of revenue and potentially I've got a cash burn that's going to happen on ongoing basis, I've only got a couple of options. Either I really cut down everything, which anyway all of us will need to start looking at, as well as look at how do you survive and reinvent yourself and pivot yourself to the new opportunities and options that are coming up, right? Because with every adversity, there is an opportunity to realign and change, right? And I think this is forcing that change. And it's not only at the founders side. I think I'm seeing that happening at industry, and I work very closely with the pharma industry as well as the distributors, retailers, and we kind of in the thick of all the supply chain dramas that are going on. Starting to see a lot more acceptance coming through within only a last few days, that people are saying digital, new ways of doing things, adoption of technology and stuff is something that they are suddenly putting it as a top priority versus something that people always wanted to do, but it was one of those additional things that will get there when when time comes. So I think that an overall level, there's both good and bad. Obviously, there are lots of concerns around cash, survival. How do you make sure you're able to see not only in the next 6 months? I think the biggest concern from a startups and the founder standpoint is in the next 6 months, is the next 12, 18 months, because you've got the whole window of going back in the market, raising your funds, realigning your business model, and making sure the investor community is still excited as they were pre this incident on the business model that you have, right? So for us, the challenge isn't around the event itself. It's everything which actually happens after that as well. And then the lag which it creates of another 6 to 12 months. So I think realistically, from our point of view, it's not even if what Arpan said, you may have a V-shaped curve and it may really bounce back in global economies. The challenge will still be that a lot of businesses will still take time to recover. We'll still have, a lot more new challenges, new set of questions that will come out from the investment community, as well as the stakeholders around, are you really adapting to the new wave of challenges which may come? Today is COVID, tomorrow could be something else, right? So are the businesses really aligned to manage certain crises? What I've heard, and even from our investors on the board, is how do you really make this long-term sustainable rather than on a short-term basis? I think that's the bigger challenge that all of us are going through in our head. It's not only the now and survive game, it's more of a long-term sustainability of the business.
That exactly leads me to the next next round of question. And what we can do is, given this is more of a shades of gray, we'll still try and request for short answers on this specific thing, because there are a couple of more questions I want to ask from what all of you have said. So let me, on that note, on what Amit was mentioning, let me try and get Mr. Agrawal's views here. So we are looking at two different, somewhat similar at a principal level, but slightly different at a execution level, views in terms of the way the recovery will happen in some sense. But there, from a government point of view, there's only so much you could do to regulate actions between various participants. But there are advisories where people are told to conserve cash, people are told to just be liquid, which means that the liquidity in the system starts getting stifled and it starts getting stuck. Any plans and thoughts at the end of the government to make sure that that circulation happens? We of course we have seen the measures by the RBI this morning, and I think that will definitely help in both interest rates as well as dissemination of credit. But there is a skepticism around the mode of recovery and the pace. So some views on that will be helpful. And on that liquidity front also, there are enough refunds and GST credits lying at the end of the government. Is there a thought process to fast track refunds on income tax or GST credits so that it leaves with people some respite and cash to keep the ball rolling? Sir, if we can have some views of guidance of yours on that.
Okay, so essentially, there are 4 or 5 different sets of things that we have identified. One is relating to the compliances, that is income tax. Second is about the indirect taxes, that is GST things. Third relates to bank loans in terms of deferment of EMIs, reduction of rates, and things like that. Finally, there are some people who have raised the issues of provident fund and ESI and all that. So that also government has taken care of for certain sections. Now, the best thing is government is open to everything. We are open to everything. What I would request all the panelists and all those who are part of this webinar, there are about 70 people now. So what I would do is, I would request IVCA is, you give me a note at the end of this discussion in two parts. One is, what is the current situation? How is it spanning out? How is it, how is it affecting the startups?
Sure.
Because, please remember that we've also said, the government has also said that there shouldn't be any layoffs. And that itself is a major issue for startups.
Yes.
Right? You can't have, on the other day, we had a discussion where, somebody was saying that I'm spending almost 1.5 crores every day on the manpower that I'm holding. And I'm not able to get anything done out of them, but I still have to hold them on. So, the carrying costs of only the manpower is huge as per the latest directions. So what I'm saying is, you see, at the end of this discussion, 1.5 hour discussion, we would like to have a white paper from all of you. IVCA can coordinate that. One is two parts. One is, what is the current situation? You can describe, like we've got beautiful insights from all the 5 speakers. So that is one. Factually describing, no value judgments there, only facts, only facts. The second part is, I would request you to come up with the wish list, that what could the government do in terms of clear actionables.
Sure.
Right. So that would help us. We are what I can tell you, that we are open to all kinds of suggestions. Everything is open, and we would be taking up. See, there are constraints. Government may not be able to do everything. After all, you see, the first priority for the government would be the have-nots, who are out there, and unprivileged people.
Fair.
And so that's a fair thing. We have limited resources. Looking into the revenues that would be coming in, there are no businesses. Actually, tax revenues of the government also will be strained. Still,
No, that's very
circumstances, what is the best that the government can do? If you could give me very specific list of the actionables on across everything. We are open to anything that you say, right from corporate affairs to CBDT to CBIC, RBI, banks, EPFO, anything, licensing if you have. As I said, there could be sectoral regulations. If there are issues in terms of extension of them, we could have them validated for the next 6 months, something like that. Anything that you would like, but please come up with specifics, like, okay, now this authority should do this, and that helps so that our delivery becomes fast.
No, sir, point noted. We will definitely get something specific across to you. And for those in the attendees, there have been some proactive measures taken already, which we have observed. And thank you, DPIIT and the government for that. We really appreciate that. And we definitely look forward to continuous dialogue on this. So on that note, let me turn it over to our investors on the panel. Rahul, once again, is that in terms of, if you have to give a guidance to the portfolio, you would say hunker down on survival, or telling that, okay, this is going to be about 6 to 8 weeks, just make sure that you're stocking up well, go through it, and then you bounce back. So the same argument about the V-shape bounce back of the growth vis-a-vis a more midterm challenge that you are seeing, and how would that also impact your investing activity for the rest of the year? Rahul.
Sure. So Ashish, see, as Amit mentioned earlier, you can't take a 6 to 8 week view on such a huge such a huge fallout that we have faced. You have to take a medium to long term view, or I would say, you'll have to pace your response based on short term and long term measures which you should adopting. Of course, in the short term, survival is the biggest concern, right? So you have to make sure that you're reading the situation well. You are doing very detailed scenario analysis around where the revenue pressure could be. No one knows the answer, right? Could it be 50%? Could it be 30%? Could it be 70%? 2 months down the line, 3 months down the line, 4 months down the line, right? As all of us know, this is an evolving situation. We're trying to flatten the curve, but we don't know how much more the lockdown may have to last, how much more disruption or how long the disruption will last. So in the short term, yes, you have to basically cover your back, manage cash flows very, very well, take a very dynamic view to the situation. But what we are telling our promoters, and most of them are, smart themselves, they are using this opportunity also to clean the board for the long term. As Amit rightly said, you have to think 1 year, 2 years down the line. And I don't want to I don't want to sound prophetic and I don't want to sound negative, but what if there is a COVID-20 as well, as many people or as many experts across the world have been warning against, right? Or something else tomorrow, right? So you have to use this opportunity and push across changes which you cannot or are not able to do in the usual course, right? Because this thing forces us to and enables us to do that. So look at making changes which don't only help you in the short term, the 1 or 2 or 3 month survival, but can also make you a better and more resilient organization 1 year, 2 year, 3 years down the line and in the long run,
Sure.
right? So both the things basically. Yeah.
Helpful, Rahul. Thanks a lot. So I think where the pattern and the data seems to suggest is that people will be out there, and that on the consumption side will definitely come back to its near normal. What I hear Rahul say is that from an overall business recovery, it will take much longer time. So no divergence in some sense, but one is the consumption, other is overall business sentiment and the recovery is how I take that point. On that note, would love to hear your take, Nitin, on in terms of the recovery timeline and cycle and the overall advisory. People who are starting out right now, people who are looking to go out and raise capital, they would definitely have headwinds like never before. So what would views be or advice be for people from that standpoint? Regulatory advisories and all that are becoming a little more fluid. Of course, most of it is pro-consumer, but funding environment becomes more challenging.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, sir. So clearly, this looks like a long-term, Ashish. I mean, I more than even short-term. And it's also, if you look at some of the way some of the other countries are actually responding. And I just heard about Australia planning to shut down for 6 months. If this is going to happen, we are talking significant implications in terms of all export businesses also. So clearly, it's not just what we are sort of likely to undergo in India, but it's also in terms of we have to factor in what's happening externally in terms of how the other countries are open in terms of doing business too. So clearly, this looks like a long term. There will be serious implications. Our advice, of course, to the companies is to clearly today is to focus on cash flows and spend more time on looking at managing costs, because the biggest worry is obviously on compensation, which I think Anilji alluded to, and the notification by the government not to sort of lay off employees has actually worried startups and the MSMEs and the SMEs more particularly, I should say. So that's a big worry. I think they will need flexibility on that count to sort of address that, because that's the standard overhead cost. If tomorrow we are likely to see a longer shutdown, I think that's going to be a big overhead for most of these companies. So that's a worrisome kind of a situation that most of them have expressed to us in the last few days. In terms of fundraising, of course, the environment looks, obviously this is not going to be a great environment for fundraising, at least for the next 3 months as I see it. But there are some companies on the ground already in discussions with several investors. I think they will obviously be tested, as Amit has pointed out, not just based on what they were doing so far. I think they will be tested in terms of how they are going to adapt, in terms of what they will do under the circumstances with the new change environment and the new business environment that is likely to emerge, with all the issues around the work in terms of slowdown, delays, etc., etc. The numbers will have to be calibrated, evaluations will have to be recalibrated, I'm sure. So it's not going to be an easy one in terms of fundraising, for sure.
Sure. So I think that's a useful data point. And also, I think while you mentioned about the Australian shutdown of 6 months, I think there was a panic forward going around, which I don't think is the case.
Oh, great. Okay, that's nice to hear that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. There is.
They're closing their borders for indeterminate.
Yeah.
They didn't put a timeline on it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Before I go on to Amit and Arpan, I wanted to just reach out to all the attendees on the call. So please put out your questions and be ready. After one quick round, we would get to questions for all the panelists. And I think some of you who may have specific measures for the government, we have a very listening government and a very proactive set of representatives here on the call. It would be very useful and valuable to get feedback on that as well. So please be ready with your Q&A. We'll start in the next few minutes. So Amit, from an inward-looking exercise, as a team,
Yep.
When we talk to some of the growth founders in the portfolio, you realize that one side of the team, maybe the ops side, and sometimes even the customer service side, depending on what nature of the business is, may not really have anything to look forward to in the current few weeks of complete lockdown. And in the next few days after or weeks thereafter, also nothing much. So as a founder, how is it that you all are doing, what are you doing to keep the momentum on, keep the company and the members of the team engaged? What are the activities you are resorting to just keep the ship together?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. So first of all, I think the whole work from home culture in India is fairly new, right? So people are still getting used to it. I get still a lot of phone calls from our leaders around, what do I do? How do I really do things what I'm supposed to do? And these are genuine questions, right? And because it's a totally new way of doing things. So a lot of the new technology solutions that I think people know about it, whether it's Zoom or Slack, we saw different customer support functions and so on. So I think that the advent and use of those technologies, at least helping and supporting people can stay in touch much more than what they could even 3-4 years ago, right? So that's also pushed the change internally, whether it's our organization or when I look at some of the others, where use of these technologies is becoming almost like a lifeline for everyone to connect, right? And I've got some friends in the corporate side who are industrialists. They're also doing these things on this daily level, and I'm sure Nitin and everyone's got these big screens and they're doing these telecons on a regular level, 12 to 15 hours a day. Interestingly, when I talk to people, one of the things I hear, and I'm telling from personal experience as well, this work from home actually has resulted in productivity shot up, not gone down, right?
Interesting.
It's very, very interesting because everyone's just working right through. There is no break. And the clock starts and ends, and you don't know when it starts and ends, right? So I think that's the other bit is maybe we can all smile about, is also led to people genuinely wanting to stay connected and wanting to do something, also wanting to run away from what the reality of the world is, that I can't go out, right? So I think that's the other side of this whole, the separation, as I say. The other thing is we've got our leaders, simple things, they're calling each of their team members or their next line, 2 or 3 times a day, having small bits of things that they do to give them more accountability and ownership and centralized, so that these people also feel that they are part of something, they're doing something more credible. There are a lot of projects that we had which were sidelined because we just never had the bandwidth. We were all customer facing and so on. Now's the time people are starting to look at those projects also and saying, okay, can we start looking at some of these basics around get our website properly up and running, get your, your decks from the customer side or your marketing material, collaterals. There's lots and lots of things that you need to do, which you always look at as we get to it someday. So I think what's also my call out to all my fellow founders and stuff is look at things that are always been there that you wanted to look at, realign them and saying if there is bandwidth and people you want to retain and you want to engage with, there's enough and plenty. The last point, and I'll pause there, we also repurposing our teams. So there are certain teams who we really want to retain, but to your point and Anilji's point, you don't want to let go. Are there ways that we can repurpose them to do something else? So we have some feet on street to go out to pharmacies and so on and so forth. We've turned them now to go out and do deliveries, right? Because that's now a much bigger need than engagement of pharmacy. So there are different things you can do to repurpose and realign teams to make sure you're able to capture. But it's not hard, right? It's not easy. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we just started. Let's be honest. That's day 2 or 3, if my count is right. And it's a long, long way to go.
Yeah. Thanks. No, it all helps. I think we in some sense, we're discovering the nuances of the problem and figuring out solutions on the fly. So I'm going to go across and request Arpan for some free advice. They do help, and they're really good at doing these sessions and assignments, and they support some of our portfolio companies as well, where they do these interesting sessions around founder mentality and sales mentality, etc. What I'm going to request Arpan to just share a few tidbits for benefit of everyone on some aspects of that in times like this. One thing that can go wrong is going wrong, if I can say, and more. So how do we, some of it, what is it that we can bring together from some of those sessions that you typically do and take?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me give a few points. One, I'll offer, we put out a lot of consulting firms are putting out lots of materials, so everyone's probably getting flooded. But there's a few sheets we put out on working from home, particularly around how to be personally effective. And one topic we haven't spoken a lot is mental health, because it does become a little bit difficult working from home. I'm happy to share those for everybody. I do think it's a particular, I think we're in day 3 of our lockdown of 21 days. And to Mr. Agarwal's point, probably a little more beyond that 21. So mental health will become quite critical. So I'll share that. The thing I want to talk about is for the founders, for CEOs, because I think we have PE and VCs on here. What we're spending time beginning to talk to our clients about, and for ourselves, because this applies to each of us in our, whether you're an investor like my panelist, or whether you're a founder or consultant, it applies to my own firm, which is a framework of what do you need to do to act now to secure the safety and security of your people and your communities, and what do you need to do to act now for business continuity purposes, versus what do you need to do to plan now for the recovery when it comes. It will come. It might come in 3 months, it might come in 6 months, it'll come at different paces, but a recovery will come, and it's worth planning for now. And the second thing we're in that plan now is plan for a new world. I think everybody here said is we're not going to go back to what it was like on February 1st, 2020. And what we're saying in terms of act now, and this applies differently to startups versus founders versus more established companies, is there's 7 areas to act now and plan now, whether it's balance sheet, preserving cash and creating liquidity. In the plan now, that could be pursuing opportunistic M&A or opportunistic hiring. In cost structure, I mean, everyone here is doing this in the act now, which is stress testing your P&Ls and taking no regret actions. We're doing that. I'm sure you're doing that. There's also a plan now for a sustainable cost structure. And while it may sound crass to say it, This type of environment and crisis will force each of us to look and say, do we have the right cost structure going forward? If working from home becomes more permanent or people get used to it, should we think about office and real estate differently? Customers right now, we're all doing this, right? Protecting our customers and revenue through focus and empathy and discipline. But I think in a more digital world, in a more local world, what would you different from plan now? From operations, everything now is about stabilization, right? Supply chains, branches. But what do you do going forward to restructure, right? To create resilience? I don't think any of us will ever presume again that this won't happen. I don't think Rahul and Nitin will ever go through a diligence process in IC and not ask again what a future pandemic could do, right? This is going to cause so much damage in portfolios. Right. We're always going to ask this from a plan now. From a people, absolutely. All of us, everybody on this call, everybody on this panel, the act now is safeguarding our people and contingency planning so our people can be productive and mentally healthy from where they are. The plan now is we all have to have new ways of working. I have clients and companies that didn't have a business continuity plan that are actually stuck. They can't get laptops to homes, right? Their VPNs can't handle 2,000 sessions or 10,000 sessions. So you have to plan now for different ways of working. And so I think the biggest advice I can give you, your teams and people on this call is, appropriately 90%, 98% of our bandwidth today and mental bandwidth is focused on acting now to secure safety of people and business. But as we get into next week and the week after, you need to start spending 20%, 30%, 40% of planning for a new world and planning for recovery. So let me pause with that.
No, that's useful. I think, well, I have a follow-up question or two on this, but let me just pause here and take a break for Q&A. And then if we have some more time, I'm going to do a quick fire question for everybody for a quick fire answer. So there is a question here, and I think possibly Rahul and or Nitin can put some perspective on that. And this is from a perspective, how can we best support both of our promoters and funders? The person is from an investment bank through this challenging time. And to follow up question that is being asked is, when the economy starts picking up and the shutdown is called off, there is going to be high demand for cash. How do we prepare for that, and how do we take care of both sides? Rahul, would you like to start with that? And we can have some other perspective from Nitin after that as well.
Yeah, sure. So Ashish, as you and most of the participants will know, see, getting private equity funding is a long process, right? Because there are a lot of hoops attached to it. It doesn't happen overnight like few other forms of funding. So if someone has not yet started the process, I think for the short-term need, private equity may not be the best solution right now. So I think what investment bankers can do is whichever promoters or companies they have good relationship with and have been talking to them about potential fundraisers, possibly talk to them about all the available options, right? There are many other options, and hopefully some of those could be very quick fire solutions like venture debt, or temporary solutions like venture debt, or other solutions. Private equity, unfortunately, takes a bit longer time, right? I mean, for public listed companies, again, it could still happen a bit faster. But again, so that is how you can navigate to help the promoters. See, most of the promoters and most of the owners, they may not even be thinking in the terms we have, which we have outlined over the last 1 hour. They may not be foreseeing the situation as, as a long-term or a medium-term pain, right? They might be just thinking about it as a 2-month, 2-week, 3 weeks, possibly, right? So talk to them, sensitize them about cash flow planning, sensitize them about, conserving costs, cutting costs, building a leaner organization. And as far as funding needs are concerned, I think sensitize them and teach them about all the available options, including debt and short-term debt or mezzanine financing. Private equity doesn't have. Yeah.
Any added perspective, Nitin? Because there's another question following up for you. We can't hear you.
Yeah. Okay, I completely echo Rahul on this. I think the shorter options would be typically debt. Of course, on the health tech and medtech side, of course, you have options from PDB as well as the Department of Science and Technology and DBT, who have actually opened up their purses in the last few days. So we have been actually encouraging some of these younger health tech companies to actually avail of all the options that they have actually opened up for, especially for COVID solutions. So most of these companies are actually applying for that. So that's good. But having said that, it will be largely debt related kind of solutions in the internet. I completely agree with you.
Sure. So I'll just take a small sidestep. Arpan has to head out. Thanks a lot, Arpan, for joining us on this call. Appreciate your time and insights. We'll be in touch. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Best to everybody. Thank you.
Let's go to the next question. So the next question was, and something that again, I think the investors on the panel can answer is, are there certain sectors and subsectors which will fundamentally grow with a different trajectory going forward? So this is a question from Gurveen Bedi. And then there's one more question, which is about the scenario, which is measures that companies are taking where sales are cyclical and at present missing out on opportunities of sales during lockdown. So maybe we can divide these two questions up between all three of us. Rahul, would you go out for the first measures are being taken where sales is cyclical and at present missing out on opportunities of sales during lockdown?
So see, it's not an easy one, right? I mean, when there's a lockdown, when the supply chain is disrupted, when the consumer behavior right now is not, let's call it not sane, right? Everyone is just trying to cover the back and provide for the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. No one is thinking about the medium term right now. So cyclical industries would be hit badly, unfortunately, unless they have a backup structure on their organization structure, their supply chain, which can quickly modulate and turn from a at source service or a product to a delivered service or a product. I think there is not much hope, right? I mean, they'll have to just lie low, do it as much as possible. But again, doing business in the current environment or doing business in a new way in current environment, it will not be very easy to modulate or change track for everyone. So many cyclical industries will be hit badly. The ones who have their backend geared up to sort of move to a different form of supply chain, to an online delivery or to a remote delivery, I think it will be very difficult for them to maintain.
I can't agree more on this, Rahul. There's another dimension to it, which I would definitely like to bring out for all of us, is that I think from thinking about sales of a company, I think we have to move to thinking about the company and the sector. So like Anilji, welcome this whole dialogue, that please reach out and ask for things that you need from the government. So if depending on the nature of the business, depending on the exact vertical that you're catering to, you'll have to think about areas on how government interventions and policy interventions are likely to be helpful. And I think that is something that it's a welcome change amongst all this crisis, which as an option we should never forget and ignore. Nitin, verticals and sectors that will grow from here on after the lockdown?
I think clearly the immediate term is obviously healthcare. There's no doubt about it. Anything to do with healthcare diagnostics will certainly do well. But as the things open up, obviously consumer will be the next one, I'm sure. Financial services should be good. I think that's the other sector that I expect that to continue to do well. So these are the three plays broadly as I see, which will continue to be exciting from an investment perspective.
Okay. We have a few questions coming on from YouTube also. This is live on YouTube. And that is, what's the long-term impact do we see for traditional non-digital startups, especially in areas of printing, packaging, etc.? While I think I will try and answer that, as a founder, I'm going to request some views from Amit as well. So in terms of I think the challenges across the board, yes, it's a bad thing that we're in the midst of this crisis. The unfortunate thing, but neutralizing factor is that this is existing across the globe. So it is not something that there is only going to be one or others affecting. You had challenges anyway. So I don't think this is going to be different for all of the verticals. So incremental challenges are not going to be more or less for a particular function. It's the nature of the differences which will decide the magnitude, is what my sense is. Amit, you have a different view or you have a perspective? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So I think if I look at globally and all the sectors, healthcare, obviously we're lucky to be in healthcare as a sector and being able to help out. But one of the key things I look at, and I think going back to the question, it doesn't matter which industry, I think it's around how you are delivering the solution and how you're leveraging, different ways and mechanisms, and how flexible are your systems in place. Because tomorrow there could be a huge cybersecurity issue that all technology and everything else shuts down, and the only thing left is to do non-traditional ways of doing things, right? It could actually be the actual inverse of what you're facing with. So to me, it's more the flexibility in the business processes and the business model than the technology or not technology or the industry per se. In different cycles, obviously, different industries go through challenges. Obviously, I'm not a investor like Nitin or Rahul, but my humble view is there are certain industries which are cyclical. There are certain like healthcare and stuff which are more traditional, conservative because it's human related. These continue over a small growth but steady. So I think from a sector standpoint, I don't have a very strong view. I only have a view around the business model and how flexible it is or not, which will decide the future course. I think that's the one learning I've got as well, is make sure we create enough flexible processes that tomorrow, if something else was to happen, you're not left with everything focused on doing things in a particular manner.
Helpful, Amit. Anilji, we need your intervention here. There is a question for you. And while you have kindly agreed to have questions and issues sent out to you, the specific that has been asked for is, and this is something that even we felt when we were discussing with a large portfolio of ours at Bloom. Can the government consider relaxing TDS rates, etc., so that it puts more cash in the hands of businesses? Reduced rates of tax liabilities across board on some areas will definitely be very valuable. Would government be open to some of these options? Sir, we can't hear you. You'll have to unmute.
See, I'm sure you don't expect a binary answer on this panel, right?
No, I don't.
Yeah. So as I said, we are open to everything. We are open to everything. Let's have a wish list. Let's have a laundry list, because
sure,
increasing working capital in the hands of the entrepreneurs is one of the primary objectives, and it needs to be done. So how far and in which form it needs to be done needs to be carefully considered. We
appreciate.
Yeah.
Sure. The next one is, since any ideas around interaction and touching base with the probable customers, given we can't have on the ground sales? Well, I don't think any of us would really have any solutions to that. There's a lockdown for a purpose, and it holds us in good stead to comply with and support the government machinery, rather than finding ways and methods to have on the ground interactions. I think every question around the functionality of the business would really make a lot more sense. But it is going to be hard to have any sort of interactions, unless, of course, you are in the essential services. So that's what I feel. And if somebody else has a different answer on the panel, more than happy to have feedback. The other question is, how are the LPs reacting to the situation, and what has been their advice to GPs and startups? So I think three of us can answer that. I'll just take a stab at it and then go over to Nitin for his inputs. I think the institutional LPs are definitely measured. We are getting inbound mails from them requesting for calls and all that. There have been communication from the LPs proactively. This is what we expect from portfolio companies as well. And people are reaching out to us in the same way to our communication on understanding what is the gravity of the situation and how companies are hit, how much time will it take for companies to come back. One overarching feedback, without it being cast in stone, of course, most LPs, evolved LPs, would leave it in the hands of the investors, the GPs. But then they are saying, please do restrain for new checks, do watch out on how you are putting out, and you might need some degree of bridge capital as well. Just before this call, saying it aloud because this is something which we felt really good about, we had a reach out from Sidby, who's one of our LPs, and they were asking questions around how do you think we can help you guys across the fund community as well as the portfolio of ours. So I think most institutional people are responding, stepping up to the whole challenge. At HNIs, there would be skepticism because they would have exposures of all types. So I think communication is the key. But so far, we have seen measured reactions and more keenness to learn from the situation rather than panic. Rahul, Nitin, would love your take on this as well.
No, absolutely. I think we have similar calls. I think similar messages we have got from our LPs. I think we've got emails. We are organizing calls and sort of responding to them. It's just about knowing what's happening on the ground at this point of time. So that's the feedback.
Yeah, in our case, the LP concerns depend on where the LP is sitting in. We've had interactions with European LPs who are very, very nervous right now, because I think personally for them it's a very challenging time in Europe, right? So that affects their response and their concern around the entire situation. LPs who are sitting in Hong Kong are a bit more relaxed now. I think business there is returning slowly back to normal, so they are a bit more relaxed about the situation. But yeah, from everyone, they're very consistent, two very consistent data points which they want to know about and want us to watch like a hawk: our cash flow situation of the companies and debt related covenants, and can they land into debt related issues. I think those are the two biggest concerns right now.
Sure. There's a question from Anshul on real estate, a sector that seems most affected. And there's a question for Mr. Agrawal. Is that, are any steps being planned by the government to help the real estate companies? So while, of course, we can request Mr. Anil Agrawal's views, I would like to just repeat one thing that he said at least a couple of times on this call. And that is, please reach out, put out all your views with specific agenda items and actionables. And we have a listening government out here, will not stand between you and Mr. Agrawal. So, sir, why don't you just also respond?
See, real estate will come very late. See, at this point of time, let's be very clear. At this point of time, it is a question of survival. अरे यार जिंदा रहोगे उसके बाद ही तो बाकी का काम होगा. At this point of time, all efforts of the government are towards flattening the curve, right? So, frankly speaking, we are not actually looking at the ones who are haves, and in fact, you are supposed to be contributing towards management of this whole situation. So, I think real estate can wait for some time. And similarly, there is people are very getting very anxious about an economic package for MSMEs, for startups. So it will come, but step by step, there has to be from the government's point of view, there are priorities. So we are moving step by step towards that, and soon you will have that also.
Thanks a lot. We have maybe a question or two. No, I don't think we have any more left. Amit, we are pretty much at the end of it. If there's time, happy to. We have a very distinguished panel. We can talk more, but I don't know. That was the plan. So we have no more questions fresh coming in. Let us know how you want to do this. More than happy to take a round extra, or we can cover up.
Yeah, sure. I think, we can just summarize it quickly. Thank you so much. I think, first of all, I'd like to thank all of you, and especially also again, thank Anil sir for, we've already started working, sir, as you said those golden words. There's already a couple of white papers being built under progress, and the IVCA VC Sector Council is actively now contributing, building up all the questions, which list are these folks here. I mean, including Amit, Rahul, Ashish, Nitin, and Arpan. We'll all consolidate, sir, and send across a wish list to you by end of day today, and tomorrow some more addition is required. So again, thank you everyone. Thank you attendees. I think we had over 80 odd attendees. Around at one point at Zoom, around 60, and then plus several hundreds on Twitter and LinkedIn following this conversation. I think it suits our purpose. The conversation was very relevant and completely as we had figured out. So thank you everyone. I think thank you Anil sir again, Ashish, Nitin, Amit, Rahul, and if in case you want to make any closing remarks, Anil sir, I think that'll be great.
No, I think it's been a great, insightful conversation. I've learned very good insights from all the panelists that the conversation has been going on, and I'm looking forward to the white paper that you will be circulating. Thank you.
Thank you, Anilji. We look forward to working closely with you and the system to make this a fast recovery. Thanks a lot, all the panelists. Thank you, IVCA. Stay safe, all. Amit, you were saying something?
No, I just said thank you.
Okay,
Cool.
thanks.
Thank you.
All.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thanks to all the delegates. Thank you. Cheers.
Amit.